Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I feel quite junior standing here because I haven't had 25 years of experience well, apart from living. My story is that I, about 6 years ago, for various reasons, decided to write a book about sanitation. So for the subsequent 6 years have been quite a steep learning curve for me and for my immediate family and friends. I think they've just about got used to me talking about shit and poop all the time, and now I'm starting to talk about periods. So my brother keeps sending me tweets saying, "Do you have to talk about periods again?" I say, "Yes, when you stop talking about cars, I will." I came to the topic of menstruation and menstrual hygiene through sanitation, and I'm surprised it took me so long. In fact, I'm slightly ashamed of myself that it took me a few years. I barely mentioned it in my book. I was concentrating on the terrible statistics around sanitation, the death toll from diarrhea, and I didn't really address it, but I should have done, because once you make the connection, it's quite obvious. And so I came to it last year mostly when I was invited to go and travel around rural India for 3 weeks with a travelling sanitation carnival. That's the kind of thing that happens to you when you write a book about shit. It was a real eye-opener. And I was really struck by what I learned in those 3 weeks. Not least that tents have absolutely no aural privacy whatsoever. I'm starting with a picture which was taken in Nepal by Alison Shelley, who's done a project on for the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. And this is actually a chalpadi, which is what Helen alluded to at the beginning. This is the family cattle shed, and this is where this young girl has to live for 4 or 5 days every month when she has her period. And that's because she's considered unclean and polluting. And I started with this because immediately, presumably, all of us think, well, that's terrible, that's awful, that's obvious stigma, it's damaging, it's bad, it shouldn't happen. But the thing about menstrual hygiene and poor menstrual management is that the damage is also much more insidious and broader and deeper than even you'd expect from that picture. So I wrote about this young girl who I met in Gwalior in India, and I'd gone out with the school's outreach team on the yatra, which was the carnival, and they would go into schools and do menstrual hygiene and talk to girls about their experiences. And I just sat in on various, they were doing surveys as well, and this girl really struck me. Her name was Neelam, and she just sat down and she told her story very simply. And her story was that her mother died when she was about 5 years old, probably from breast cancer. And when Neelam was about 12, she started bleeding, and she was horrified. She had no idea what this was. No one had ever talked to her. There was no female relative in her family. She spent the whole day in the latrine. The family did actually have a latrine, quite unusually. Convinced she had cancer, absolutely convinced. Nobody could persuade her otherwise. And then finally her sister-in-law, her brother had recently married, her sister-in-law told her that she was menstruating and it was normal. And this was an absolute shock to Neelam. She had no idea. I mean, I remember when I was 12 and I was at school when I started, that often happens to young girls in this country and similar countries, and I had to go to the school secretary and I had to ask for a sanitary pad. And of course in those days, in about 1980, early 1980s, it was a brick, but never mind. It was very embarrassing to ask for. It wasn't particularly comfortable, but it was there, it was available, and although it was embarrassing, it was there. Now this was a whole level of something else that I was very shocked by. But Neelam got her information, and she subsequently knew what to do. But when we talked to other girls, and when the MHM lab, which was at the yatra, which was run by the Collaborative Council, which was a tent in the corner of the yatra, which is the carnival ground, and it was a really, you could always spot it, it was very colourful, and you could always spot it because there were lots of boys outside because they weren't allowed in. So they'd all be crowding around wanting to get inside, but you could also spot it for all the women and girls waiting outside to go in. And And there were things to entice them. There were these wonderful, what's the actual name? Menstrual hygiene bracelet. And I believe we have one in the audience. Yes, thank you. So girls could make their bracelet. And one of the male volunteers made mine, and he gave me 21 red beads and 4 green beads. So there was some work to be done. But nonetheless, so girls would come in and they would do this, and then they would go inside and they would talk. That's what they did. They would talk. And some of the, it was revelatory, their experiences. And I'm just going to share some of the research that Archana and her team gathered. And that was that 70.9% of girls had no idea what was happening to them when they started bleeding. 73% of girls and women thought that menstrual blood was dirty blood. Now think about that, because if they think it's dirty blood, then it means that they think that they're dirty too. And they've internalized this. And in fact, I was just thinking, I had a lipstick in my pocket just then, and I remember thinking, I better take that out because people might think it's a tampon. I mean, it's not just a developing country issue. We have internalized and stigmatized menstruation to an incredible degree across the world. But of course, in certain areas of the world, it's much more damaging. Inside the tent, girls and women could collect these cloth sanitary pads, which were being handed out by these 2 girls who, this is what happened when I asked them to smile. But the most extraordinary thing about the yatra was that was the thirst for knowledge and the thirst to talk. You had, on the last day of the yatra, I remember it was World Toilet Day, and we were in a very poor town called Betia in Bihar. And we thought, most of us expected that no one would turn up because it was a state holiday. It was described to me as pretty much akin to Christmas. So you think the last thing people would want to do was come to a sanitation carnival and queue up and talk about periods. So this is what happened on Christmas. This is all the girls and women queuing up to come into the yatra because they were so thirsty for knowledge and information and communication. And I think we've heard that we need more communication, we need to talk more openly about this. I spend a lot of time saying that we need to talk more about poop and shit and toilets, and I didn't realize that this was even a more desperate situation. And I think things are really starting to change, because there is, Sandy as an outsider, outside the development world, as just a journalist and a writer, I can see that people are making the connections, that people from health and business and education are understanding that 23% of Indian girls drop out of school when they reach puberty, basically because they start menstruating, and they've been holding it in for years, and then when they start menstruating it just gets too much. They think that they smell, they think that they're disgusting, they think they're dirty, they don't go back to school. There are other issues in that the girls are then considered to be sexually available, maybe sent out to do transactional sex to buy money for sanitary pads because nothing else is available. They're, as you saw with the Chowpatty, they'll be subject to various restrictions and taboos. A girl told me very, very seriously that she didn't put on nail polish when she had a period because it would go rotten. So this, and the solution to this, I think, is very simple, is more openness, and that means between sectors, it means between various fields and specialisms in development, but it also means from people like me, and from talking about it in the media, from talking about it openly, from not worrying whether a lipstick looks like a tampon in your pocket, and simple things like that. And I think we are at the beginning of really big change, and I think it's really exciting, and this event is a great start and a spark. Thank you.